It is often claimed that the Bible should be dismissed as being just a religious book. However, the Bible is much more than a religious book. It is also a book of history. In fact, 22 Old Testament books and 5 New Testament books deal, at least in part, with history. The historical books of the Old Testament are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and Jonah. The historical books in the New Testament are Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. If the Bible is the Word of God, we should expect its presentation of history to be accurate. So the questions before us are, is the Bible supported by a secular recorded history? And is the Bible supported by archaeology? What follows is a discussion of the evidence supporting the biblical view of history. A major source of criticism against the Bible is that it disagrees with some modern claims about ancient history. This results in part from secular presupposition that the Bible is wrong unless proven correct to the satisfaction of God-hating scoffers who assume the Bible to be largely Bronze Age mythology. The reason for this is that secular historians usually start with a materialistic, naturalistic, atheistic view of history. By definition, a materialistic, naturalistic, atheistic view of history assumes that miracles are impossible. As such, since the biblical account of history has lots of miracles, it is excluded as a starting assumption. As a result, a materialistic, naturalistic, atheistic view of history is not going to agree with the Bible, no matter what the evidence is. A major source of difficulty is the standard Egyptian history, which has such disagreement with the Bible that it is routinely used to attack the Bible. There are 2 types of science: operational science and historical science. Observational science involves determining how things happen in the present based on direct observation and experimentation. Historical science, on the other hand, involves determining what happened in the past by indirect observations in the present and not based on observations made of the past. This does not necessarily invalidate historical science, but it makes historical and operational science different types of processes. One of the problems faced by historical science is the fact that the further you are looking back in time, the worse the preservation of evidence and the increase of the number of variables. The result is that historical science is far more susceptible to conjecture and philosophical assumptions. While operational science is not totally immune to conjecture and philosophical assumptions, they are less of an influence because its observations and experimentation deal with the present, and the results are the results. Sooner or later, erroneous conjectures and philosophical assumptions in operational science will be shown false, no matter how cherished they may be. On the other hand, historical science is always dealing with incomplete evidence, and this forces a need to fill in the gaps with a theoretical system that serves as a basic storyline for interpreting data. With historical science, time always causes evidence to decay and increases the risk of some form of contamination. Forensics runs into this problem all the time. The fresher a crime scene, the better the chances of finding the person who committed the crime, because contamination and decay reduce that chance over time. Forensics benefits from the fact that it deals with recent history. However, other forms of historical science are not so fortunate in that they are dealing with a distant past. For them, contamination and decay are real problems such that they can even serve as excuses for why data does not match theory. The historical sciences of archaeology, paleontology, and geology are particularly prone to contamination and decay, as well as conjecture and philosophical assumptions. This also means that the interpretation of evidence is highly dependent on the theoretical system being used. The result is that the same evidence can be evaluated by 2 different theoretical systems and produce radically different conclusions. This does not mean one person is stupid and the other smart. It just means they're looking at the same data from different perspectives. It needs to be realized that the different theoretical systems are often based on different worldviews. When dealing with creation and evolution, this is where the real difference can be found. Creationists are looking at the data from a biblical worldview, while evolutionists look at the data from materialistic, naturalistic, atheistic worldview. The big difference is that creationists recognize this fact, while evolutionists ignore and even deny it. According to the Bible, God created the earth and the universe about 6,000 years ago, Earth time. We are told by the scientific and educational establishments that science proves the earth is about 4.5 billion years old and the universe is about 14 billion years old. So has science really proven that the earth is 4.5 billion years old and the universe is about 14 billion years old? The real answer is no. First of all, there are a number of lines of scientific evidence that indicate that the Earth and solar system are much less than 4.5 billion years old. Second, both the 4.5 billion year figure of the Earth and the 14 billion year figure for the universe are based on specific theories about the origin of these systems. Called the Neville hypothesis and the Big Bang theory, they both assume a totally materialistic, naturalistic, atheistic view of origins. They both eliminate God as a starting assumption. Yes, the Big Bang was first proposed by a Roman Catholic priest, but he ignored God in his thinking. And in today's version of the Big Bang, any suggestion of any form of intelligence in the process is not allowed. The same thing goes for universal common descent evolution. It assumes a totally materialistic, naturalistic, atheistic view of the origin and development of life on Earth. True, Darwin was trained in theology, but he had long since turned his back on God and the Bible when he conceived of his theory. In all three of these cases, not only were these theories invented without any thought of God, but they were deliberately conceived for the purpose of dismissing the biblical account of creation. So it is natural that biblical young Earth creation would run counter to these theories, because they were intended to go against the Bible from their inception. The Bible is quite clear that there was a global flood about 4,700 years ago, give or take a century or so. That the Genesis flood was a global catastrophe is the most natural interpretation of the text of the Bible. Reducing it to some kind of local flood requires ignoring the plain text of Genesis 7 to 8 and other parts of Scripture as well. The only reason for questioning that it was a global flood is to try to reconcile the Bible with uniformitarian geology. Uniformitarian geology did not come about as a result of godly men who simply could not find evidence for the Genesis flood. It was the result of a deliberate effort to get rid of the Genesis flood and explain geology without it. Charles Lyell was a deist who, as a starting point, did not believe in the Bible. He, in fact, hated it and wanted to get rid of its influence. Today, uniformitarian geology is still the establishment system. Though they do allow for some catastrophic processes, the Genesis flood is still excluded as a starting assumption. Modern uniformitarian geology assumes a totally materialistic, naturalistic, atheistic view of Earth's origin and history. The Genesis flood and God are not allowed to even be considered, so naturally, it and the Bible would disagree. One of the biggest attacks used against the Bible is the standard Egyptian chronology. Based on this chronology, it is claimed that there is no evidence for the biblical account of Jewish history, including the patriarchs in Egypt, presence and enslavement of Israel in Egypt, the Exodus, the conquest of Canaan, and the United Kingdom. Because of this, the claim is often made that these events never occurred, and that the Bible contains mythology. The standard Egyptian chronology consists of 30 dynasties from about 3,100 to 400 BC. This Egyptian chronology is based mainly on a list of pharaohs compiled by the 3rd century priest Manetho. His list of pharaohs includes the lengths of their reigns. A key assumption of the standard Egyptian chronology is that these pharaohs reigned sequentially, but some seem to have reigned at the same time in different areas of Egypt, such as the north and the south. Not only was Manetho's pharaohs list not intended as a chronological account of Egyptian history, but it also does not agree with other 3rd century Egyptian sources. The standard Egyptian chronology is used to date sites around the Mediterranean, which has resulted in an unexplained Dark Age. This and other problems have prompted efforts to revise the Egyptian chronology. It gets even worse because the chronology is also based on a major mistake made by Jean-François Champollion, translator of the Rosetta Stone. He assumed the 22nd dynasty Egyptian pharaoh Shoshank I was Shishak. Shishak was the pharaoh who plundered Solomon's temple, according to the Bible, in 2 Chronicles 12. Here is a straightforward chart of the standard Egyptian chronology. Note how it is divided into various periods, extending back to 3100 BC. Comparing this chart to the biblical timeline clearly shows a conflict, because it has the earliest dynasties as predating the flood. This chart includes a revised Egyptian chronology that not only fits well with the biblical account, but solves all of the other problems as well, including the unexplained dark ages in other parts of the Mediterranean. It also explains some curious water erosion on the Sphinx that cannot be explained by the standard chronology, because this revised chronology places the construction of the Sphinx within the post-flood Ice Age, during which Egypt would have received ample rain. It turns out that there is actually abundant evidence for the history of Israel, as described in the Bible. The problem is that because of the standard Egyptian chronology, archaeologists are looking in the wrong place. Furthermore, the evidence that is there is dismissed as being related to Israel, because it is not where the standard Egyptian chronology says it should be. One of the big arguments used against the biblical account is the claim that Moses could not have written the Torah, even if he were a real person, because the writing needed for it did not exist. Part of the problem is that the form of Hebrew we are most familiar with did not exist at the time. It is the script used by both the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is known as Modern Hebrew. This form of Hebrew script dates to about 900 BC, meaning that it was probably the script used by David and Solomon. Because this is the earliest form of Hebrew that was known when the documentary hypothesis was developed, its date is a common argument against the Mosaic authorship of the Torah. However, in an ancient Egyptian copper mine at Serabit el-Khadim, another script called Proto-Sinaitic script can be found. It turns out to be an earlier form of Hebrew and is clearly much older than previous scripts and based on Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is a picture of the early Hebrew script found in the copper mine at Serabit el-Khadim. Here is an enhanced version of the text on the wall of this mine. Here is another use of this script near Thebes, the ancient Egyptian capital. Here is the modern Hebrew script alongside a chart showing early, middle, and late Hebrew. Here is the script from 900 BC. It would be classified as Middle Hebrew. Here are the pictures that have already been presented of the Proto-Sinaitic script. It shows a very close comparison to the early Hebrew script. Here is a better comparison of this script to our chart. The comparison to early Hebrew is uncanny. This can easily be the earliest form of Hebrew. This evidence is consistent with the alphabet being Israelite in origin rather than Phoenician, as long as the Israelites were in Egypt at the time the Bible says they were there. Sadly, because of the indoctrination of the documentary hypothesis and evolutionary thinking, many scholars dismiss this as being Hebrew despite the fact that it is a perfect fit. This inscription traces the script to the time of the 12th dynasty pharaoh Amenemhat III. In the revised chronology would be the time of Joseph. There was also a 7 to 10 year famine during this pharaoh's reign, suggesting that Joseph himself may have been the one who invented it. In looking for evidence of the patriarchs in Egypt, we probably will not find evidence of Abraham's short visit. Not only would his stay have been too short, but his significance in Egypt would have been too minor for anything to be found. However, Joseph and his brothers should have left some evidence, and there is some evidence that points to them. To know where to look, let's take a look at what the Bible says. Genesis 47 verse 1, Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh, and said, My father and my brethren, and their flock, and their herds, and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen. Genesis 47 verse 11, And Joseph placed his father and his brethren, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh has commanded. By the way, the reference to the land of Ramses will be important later. Under the ruins of a city called Ramses are the ruins of an older settlement called Arvis. Arvis was from the 12th to 13th dynasties and was populated by a Semitic people and not Egyptians. The reason they are not generally considered the children of Israel is that it is hundreds of years too early according to the standard Egyptian chronology. At Arvis is a palace of the type that would belong to someone important. This would have most likely been a reward for a government official for extraordinary service to the nation. This palace has 12 pillars. This is consistent with the 12 sons of Jacob, and it is exactly what one would expect if this had been a retirement palace for Joseph. Within the palace courtyard, there are 12 graves, one of which is pyramid-shaped. Normally, a pyramid-shaped tomb would be reserved for royalty. As a result, this had to be the tomb of someone very important. Once again, Joseph fits this description. The pyramid tomb had an antechamber with a statue of the person buried there. The burial chamber had been broken into and the body removed. This is consistent with the Bible statement about the children of Israel taking Joseph's body with them when they left Egypt. In the entryway of this tomb is a statue of a Semitic man with a coat of many colors. Now, who does that remind you of? Joseph once again. Consequently, we have evidence consistent with Joseph and his 11 brothers here in the 12th dynasty. The 12th dynasty was also a time of increased power for the pharaohs. Previously, the pharaohs had to deal with nobles called nomes that ruled over local areas of Egypt. The need for their cooperation limited the pharaoh's power. This change during the 12th dynasty is consistent with these nomes selling their land and themselves to Pharaoh for food. There is also a canal that dates to the same period called the Waterway of Joseph. It makes sense to build such a canal if you're dealing with a massive famine. This actually connects Joseph and the famine to the 12th dynasty. So we have a palace at a Semitic settlement belonging to an important government official. The palace has 12 pillars and 12 graves behind it, one of which is larger in pyramid shape, suggesting someone really important. This tomb had a statue of a Semitic man with a coat of many colors, and it was broken into, and only the body was removed. All the details are a perfect fit to Joseph and his 11 brothers. However, this evidence is found in the 12th dynasty and not the 16th to 17th as indicated by the standard Egyptian chronology. So we have all of the right evidence, but seemingly in the wrong time. This is a painting from the tomb of Kashnab of Ben Hassan. It depicts 37 Semitic-speaking people who had come to Egypt possibly to trade. Here is a map of Semitic settlements that sprang up around Avars, with Avars the largest city in the area. This not only shows the presence of the children of Israel in Egypt, but also the large growth in population while there. These sites were from the 12th and 13th dynasties. The area contains uniquely Semitic graves, as is evident by body posture and grave goods. The evidence includes uniquely Semitic tools. This evidence is also from the 12th and 13th dynasties. In the Bible, the Israelites were enslaved and forced to bake mud bricks with straw. This process is still used today. Construction using mud bricks with straw is found throughout Egypt. Here is an 18th dynasty painting of prisoners making mud bricks with straw. This shows that the author of Exodus was well acquainted with construction techniques in Egypt. The Bible speaks of the male babies of the Israelites being killed, and the Semitic graves support this. There's an unusually high spike in infant graves, along with an unusually high percentage of female adult graves. Also found in the same area and time are boxes containing the remains of male babies. This is such a parallel to the Exodus that it cannot be rationally dismissed. These are pictures of the Brooklyn Papyrus with the names of Hebrew slaves from the 13th dynasty. This list of slaves from a single estate has mostly female Hebrew names consistent with the slaying of the Hebrew baby boys. Note, this is from the 13th dynasty and not the 19th with Ramses II. This data is fully consistent with the presence and enslavement of Israel in Egypt during the 12th and 13th dynasties. It is a perfect fit to the biblical account. It's just not where archaeologists expect to find it based on the Ramses II mistake. A papyrus contains a copy of an Egyptian document called the Abominations of an Egyptian sage written by a scribe named Epur. The Epur papyrus is dated from 18th dynasty, but the original dates from around the 12 and 13 dynasties. This document is strikingly similar to the 10 plagues found in the book of Exodus. Exodus 4 verse 9, "And it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice, that thou shalt take of the water of the river, and pour it upon the dry land. And the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land. Epure 7:5 Behold, Egypt is fallen to pouring of water, and he who poured water on the ground is carried off the strong man in misery. Exodus 7 verses 20 to 21. And Moses and Aaron did so, as the Lord commanded. And he lifted up the rod, and smote the waters that were in the river, in the sight of Pharaoh, and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. 21. And the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Epure 2:20 Indeed, the river is blood, yet men drink of it. Men shrink from human beings and thirst after water. Exodus 9 verse 6. And the Lord did that thing on the morrow, and all the cattle of Egypt died, but the cattle of the children of Israel died, not one. Exodus 9 verse 23. And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. Exodus 9 verse 31. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was bald. Epure 3:3, 6:3, 7:13. Good things are throughout the land, yet housewives say, Oh, that we had something to eat. Indeed, everywhere barley has perished. Behold, he who had no shade is now the possessor of shade, while the erstwhile possessors of shade are now in the full blast of the storm. Exodus 12 verse 39. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough, which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt, and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual. Epure 2:5, 2:13. Indeed, hearts are violent, pestilence is throughout the land, blood is everywhere, death is not lacking. Indeed, men are few, and he who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. Exodus 12 verse 30. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. Epure 3:14 Indeed, laughter is perished and is no longer made. It is groaning that is throughout the land, mingled with complaints. Exodus 12 verses 35 to 36. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required. And they spoiled the Egyptians. Exodus 28 verses 17 to 20. And thou shalt set in its settings of stones, even 4 rows of stones. The first row shall be a sardius, a topaz, and a carbuncle. This shall be the first row. And the second row shall be an emerald, a sapphire, and a diamond. And the third row a ligure, an agate, and an amethyst. And the fourth row a beryl, and an onyx, and a jasper. This shall be set in gold in their enclosings. Epure 2:4-5, 3:2-3. Indeed, the plunderer everywhere, and the servant takes what he finds. Indeed, gold and lapis lazuli, silver and turquoise, carnelian and amethyst, ibhe stone, and are strung on the necks of maidservants. Thus, we have evidence for the 10 plagues from the same dynasties as the other evidence for Israel and Egypt. Exodus 1 verse 11 Therefore, they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. Note that this verse is referring to treasure cities that the children of Israel built for Pharaoh, not the name of the Pharaoh. The fact is that Ramesses was the name of a region of Egypt and not the name of the Pharaoh. Genesis 47 verse 11, And Joseph placed his father and his brethren, and gave them possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Note that it is the land of Ramesses, not the Pharaoh Ramesses. This reference to the land of Ramesses is more than 200 years before the Exodus, and so could not have any connection to the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and certainly not to Ramesses II. Exodus 12, verse 37, and the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkot, about 600,000 on foot that were men, beside children. Numbers 33, verse 3, and they departed from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. On the morrow, after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with an high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians. Numbers 33, verse 5, and the children of Israel removed from Ramesses and pitched in Sukkot. All 5 uses of the name Ramesses refer to locations and not a pharaoh. Besides having the wrong time for the Exodus in relation to Egyptian history, the tendency is to have the locations of both Mount Sinai and the Red Sea crossing wrong. Even conservative scholars tend to place it around the Red Sea rather than the Gulf of Suez of the Red Sea. One reason for the lack of maps putting it in the Gulf of Suez is the fact that the Gulf of Suez has no place where even parting the water would give the Israelites a place to cross. This is because the depth produces a canyon with no way across. Furthermore, centuries of digging at the traditional Mount Sinai have produced no evidence of the children of Israel. The reason for considering this site Mount Sinai is that it was labeled such by Constantine's mother, Helena, as a result of a dream. It turns out that there is plenty of evidence for the Exodus, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel at Mount Sinai. You just have to be looking in the right places and at the right time. Sesostris III would have probably been the first pharaoh of the oppression since he was the first pharaoh of the 13th dynasty. Joseph would have been part of the 12th dynasty. He would easily qualify as a new pharaoh that knew not Joseph. He would also have been dealing with a rival king in the south from what is generally considered the 7th dynasty. One of the reasons given for the oppression was Pharaoh's concern that the Israelites would join with their enemies in the event of war. Neferhotep I is one of the last pharaohs of the 13th dynasty and most likely the pharaoh of the Exodus. He was succeeded by his brother Sokhotep IV rather than his son Hankhef, Wanferhotep. This fits with God killing the firstborn of Egypt. Also, his tomb is uncertain since his mummy has never been found. His remains are probably at the bottom of the Red Sea. The circumstances of the surrounding Neferhotep I are what we would expect for the pharaoh of the Exodus, including the fact that Egypt was conquered not long after by the Hyksos without a battle. So where was the Egyptian army? They were probably at the bottom of the Red Sea. There's a tendency to place the Red Sea crossing in the Gulf of Suez, which is one of the 2 northern branches of the Red Sea. One reason this is popular is that around the time of Moses, there was an area here called the Red Sea, which some have suggested is the correct translation of this verse because the water there would only be a few inches deep. This idea was originally invented to get rid of the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea, but it ignores the necessary miracle of God drowning the entire Egyptian army in 6 inches of water. Even more conservative scholars fall for it being in this area, considering other possible places where the water would have been deeper but still passable if the water were removed. That is one of the main problems with the Gulf of Suez, is that there is no place shallow enough where the crossing could have practically taken place, even with the parting of the Red Sea. Another reason for this idea is that it fits with the traditional site for Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. It also ignores that the only reason for considering this site Mount Sinai is that it was labeled as such by Constantine's mother, Helena, as a result of a dream. There are, however, 2 alternative sites in the Gulf of Aqaba. Both of these alternative sites are visible in this picture. The Tiran is the group of islands at the bottom of the picture, and the Nuweiba site is marked by the light peninsula sticking out on the west side of the Gulf of Aqaba. This picture shows a close-up of the Nuweiba site. It shows 2 dry riverbeds that are responsible for forming the beach area, forming the peninsula. This will later prove to be part of the major problem with this site. This is another view of the beachhead forming the peninsula with the central dry riverbed coming out to it. Had the children of Israel had indeed come to this beach, they would have qualified as being shut in by the wilderness as described to Pharaoh by his men. Here is an illustration of the land bridge at Nuweiba. One of the things you do have on both sides are deep places for the remains of Pharaoh and his troops, as well as their chariots to have ended up. It does, however, do a very poor job of illustrating the depth and the slope of this land bridge, making it seem more plausible than it really is. This is one of two matching columns, one in Saudi Arabia and one on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba, said to have inscriptions showing they were erected by King Solomon to mark the crossing of the Red Sea. He probably built them when he set up his navy in the area. 1 Kings 9 verse 26. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Elath, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. The number one problem with this claim is that there is actually only one pillar remaining, and it does not have an inscription. It is said that the other pillar was removed by the government in Saudi Arabia, but there is no way of confirming it. This leaves the entire claim open to question, making it easy to attack. This is a picture of what is claimed to be a chariot wheel, and at first glance, it would definitely seem to be one. However, there are reasons to suspect that this conclusion is wrong. Unfortunately, when you get a better look at these wheels, they turn out to be pulley wheels for modern machinery and not chariot wheels. Furthermore, the evidence we have for Egyptian chariots indicates that their wheels would have been made of wood, not metal. These are samples of coral that give all the appearance of being coral-encrusted chariot wheels. The problem is that these images are identical to what is known as table coral, which is known to form wheel-like structures, and it even frequently has a disc at the top and the bottom. Consequently, sadly, even this evidence seems to leave the convincing department. The best sample we have of an Egyptian chariot is one found in King Tut's tomb. Not only does it show that the wheels and axle were clearly made of wood, which would not have survived underwater long enough to even become encrusted with coral, but the number of spokes on the axle does not match what we are seeing in any of the pictures. Here we have a set of leg bones that could have been from a member of the Egyptian army. However, they have never been properly identified or even carbon dated. They could have been from any number of people who may have drowned and even been trapped at the bottom. So even though this has not really been refuted, it is hard to say that they really has anything to do with the Red Sea crossing. Here is a map showing the path that the Israelites would have taken to Nuweiba, and it is a pretty reasonable path that is consistent with the biblical account. The two main objections to the Nuweiba site for the Red Sea crossing. The first objection is based on the fact that the Bible gives 3 campsites for the children of Israel between Ramesses to the Red Sea, Sukkot, Etham, and Migdal. The assumption is that means that the trip only took 3 days when it would take 7 to get to Nuweiba on the Gulf of Aqaba. The problem is not only does the Bible not specifically say it took only 3 days, but they may simply not fully encamped but only stop for the night. The second objection given to this site is the current 875-meter drop and the steep slope of the land bridge, but the problem could have been worse 3,400 years ago. However, its biggest problem is the fact that this land bridge seems to be a result of sediment from the dried riverbed beach on the western side. To this day, this riverbed sometimes becomes flooded when there is heavy rain flowing into the riverbed. While the Nuweiba site for the Red Sea crossing cannot be completely ruled out, it is not as promising a case as it often seems to be in some of the discussions about it. The simple fact of the matter is that it could still be the actual site for the Red Sea crossing. However, the evidence is simply not as strong as it seems at first glance. The Bible is clear that God deliberately did not send the children of Israel by the way of the Philistines near the top, but rather into the desert. Around the perimeter of the Sinai Peninsula would be a logical route ending up at the Strait of Tiran. One of the advantages is that this path is actually quite smooth all the way around. It also ends up with the children of Israel surrounded by the desert, as the Bible indicates. Here we have a chart showing the time. 25 days to the point of the Red Sea crossing, 8 days encamped by the Red Sea, and then another 16 days to Mount Sinai. That is the site for Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, not the Sinai Peninsula. At the Strait of Tiran, there are 2 possible paths, each of which is about 16 miles long, but does not drop more than 250 meters, with a good part of the distance being only 50 meters. This makes it a lot more convenient than Nuweiba. The other path across the Strait of Tiran is simply straight across, but it has the same depths and distances. The path across the Strait of Tiran is relatively shallow, even in its deepest part, but still deep enough to wipe out Pharaoh and his troops. A direct comparison between the Strait of Tiran and Nuweiba shows the Strait of Tiran to be a much easier location than Nuweiba. The path through the Strait of Tiran also makes it easy to get to the Mount Sinai site in Saudi Arabia. This results in a total path of 700 kilometers in a 47-day journey, making it quite reasonable. Where the Strait of Tiran really shines is in its likely condition 3,400 years ago. The key is that this area has been experiencing erosion, not build-up. At the time of the Exodus, the gap between both sides would only have been about 5 kilometers, which is right at the point where this path drops to around 300 meters, making it a shorter trip without as much depth as Nuweiba, but still sufficient depth to drown army. One of the arguments commonly used against the historical nature of the Exodus is the fact that the traditional site of Mount Sinai does not show any evidence of the children of Israel. However, this fact, but also consistent with it not being the correct site. There is a mountain in Saudi Arabia called Mount Jabal el-Lawz that fits Mount Sinai perfectly, including being easily accessible to both the Strait of Tiran and Nuweiba crossing sites. Exodus 3 verse 1, Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert, and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. Exodus 3 verse 12, And he said, Certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee, that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. This suggests that Mount Sinai was in Midian, which is consistent with Mount Jabal el-Lawz being the real Mount Sinai. This rock gives every evidence of being the split rock which God used to provide water for the children of Israel. It has evidence of once flowing water through the middle of it. The evidence of this flowing water is particularly evident from what looks like sediment from a stream flowing out of the rock. While the children of Israel were at Mount Sinai, the Bible says that the top of the mountain was engulfed in fire from God. This would have been a tremendous sight, and probably a rather scary one at that. However, it is also one of the things that point to the possibility of this being the real Mount Sinai. This is because the top of the mountain is blackened, but the lower parts are normal rock. The darkening is particularly clear from the top of the mountain, but you can also vividly see the surrounding region all around it. There's also evidence at this site of a pile of rocks that looks like it had been used as an altar, including etchings on the rocks, among which are bulls. Here is a close-up image of one of the carvings of a bull. You have to remember the sin of the children of Israel of making and worshiping a golden calf. Among these etchings is one of a menorah, which is a clearly Jewish symbol that is associated with their Passover celebration. Here is a real close-up of the menorah. This clearly connects the site to the children of Israel. 1 Kings 19 verses 8-9. And he arose, and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God. And he came thither unto a cave, and lodged there. And, behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said unto him, What doest thou here, Elijah? Here is a picture of what is likely to be that very cave. Here is a picture of this cave as seen from the bottom of the mountain. This is an interesting little cave, and the location seems to indicate that it is the same cave. Now I will address some objections to Mount Jabal el-Lawz being Mount Sinai. The claim is that Mount Sinai was not actually in Midian based on Exodus 18 verse 27 and Numbers 10:30. Exodus 18 verse 27. And Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own land. Numbers 10:30. And he said unto him, I will not go, but I will depart to mine own land and to my kindred. The assumption of the claim is that Jethro's land and kindred referred to all of Midian and not just the part where he happened to live. It also ignores Exodus 3, which implies that Mount Sinai was in Midian. So, both the claim that Mount Sinai was in Midian and that it can't be are based on unclear references. This means that you cannot use the Bible to say definitively one way or the other eliminating this as an argument that Mount Sinai cannot be Mount Jabal el-Lawz. It has been argued that other altars similar to the one with the calf have been found in the area, but the presence of other features, including a menorah, connects it to the children of Israel. None of the objections raised actually show that Mount Jabal el-Lawz is not Mount Sinai. They just give someone looking for an excuse not to accept it that excuse. Scoffers even attack the fact of the conquest of Canaan by Israel. You will frequently see claims that they grew out of the Canaanites. Once again, the problem ends up being that the evidence is there, but not in the time commonly looked. Ruins of ancient Jericho. As with so much other archaeological evidence in support of the biblical account, because the standard Egyptian chronology is often dated as too early to be associated with Joshua. Here we have an illustration of how the walls of Jericho were originally constructed. It was a double wall with a steep incline between them. This made it impossible for an invading army that breached the outer wall to get up to the inner wall without being attacked from above. However, what we have today is the wall collapsed in such a way that it provides a ramp for an invading army to easily get into the city and take it. It matches the description in Joshua perfectly. Here are pictures showing the level of destruction at Jericho. This fits the description of Joshua and the Israelites totally destroying Jericho. Here is a diagram of the collapsed walls of Jericho. It shows how a large segment of the wall simply collapsed, providing a way for the children of Israel to enter the city. Here is evidence from the excavation showing house walls from the destroyed city of Jericho, showing the houses found between the upper and lower city walls. This is consistent with the description of Rahab's house being on the wall. It would have had to have been on that outer wall for her to have let down the spies. Here is a picture taken from the top of the Tell of Jericho. This was a big and high city in its day. This further supports just how much God was helping the children of Israel in the conquest. Joshua 7 verses 20 to 23. And Achan answered Joshua and said, Indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and thus have I done. When I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment, and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them, and took them. And behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver under it. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran unto the tent. And behold, it was hid in his tent, and the silver under it. And they took them out of the midst of the tent, and brought them unto Joshua, and unto all the children of Israel, and laid them out before the Lord. Joshua 7 verses 24 to 26. And Joshua, and all Israel with him, took Achan the son of Zerah, and the silver, and the garment, and the wedge of gold, and his sons, and his daughters, and his oxen, and his asses, and his sheep, and his tent, and all that he had. And they brought them unto the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, Why hast thou troubled us? The Lord shall trouble thee this day. And all Israel stoned him with stones, and burned them with fire, after they had stoned them with stones. And they raised over him a great heap of stones unto this day. So the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Wherefore the name of that place was called the Valley of Achor unto this day. Here is the archaeological site Makatir, which is now thought to be the ancient city of Ai from Joshua 7 to 8. The hill to the north of Ai, where Joshua's army encamped, is now called Jebel Abu Ammar. The Ai city gate is in the foreground. Joshua 10 verses 6 to 8. And the men of Gibeon sent unto Joshua to the camp to Gilgal, saying, Slack not thy hand from thy servants. Come up to us quickly, and save us, and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites that dwell in the mountains are gathered together against us. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said unto Joshua, Fear them not, for I have delivered them into thine hand. There shall not a man of them stand before thee. Joshua 10 verses 9 to 11. Joshua therefore came unto them suddenly, and went up from Gilgal all night. And the Lord discomfited them before Israel, and slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and chased them along the way that goeth up to Betharon, and smote them to Azekah, and unto Makkedah. And it came to pass, as they fled from before Israel, and were in the going down to Beth-horon, that the Lord cast down great stones from heaven upon them unto Azekah, and they died. They were more which died with hailstones than whom the children of Israel slew with the sword. Joshua 10 verses 12 to 14. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou, moon, in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. And there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man. For the Lord fought for Israel. One of the objections to this miracle is the havoc that would be caused if you suddenly stopped the Earth's rotation. Aside from the fact that this was a miracle and not a natural event, general relativity offers a way it could happen that would not affect anything on Earth at all. In general relativity, there's a concept known as frame dragging, where space itself ends up rotating with a nearby massive object. This happens a little bit naturally with the Earth, but not enough to be significant. All that would have been necessary for this miracle to have occurred is for God to have created a frame-dragging effect that exactly countered the Earth's rotation relative to the Sun. Nothing on Earth would have felt anything because, within the reverse rotating frame, the Earth would be rotating as normal. This is a chart showing a collection of legends around the world that suggests this account actually happened. In Asia, the Middle East, and Egypt, you have a long day recorded. In Western Africa and the Americas, you have a long night reported. In the Western Pacific, you have islands such as Hawaii reporting a long sunrise. This is exactly what we would expect to see if Joshua's long day actually occurred. As is often the case, the evidence for the conquest is there. However, based on the standard Egyptian chronology, it is in the wrong time, and so they tend to attribute the destruction of these cities to everyone but the one group of people who left us a record saying they did it. Once again, once the chronology is corrected, the archaeological evidence falls into place. Here is a chart showing the time of the judges, along with the reigns of Saul and David, and the date for Solomon beginning to build the temple in his 4th year. While archaeology does show the general setting of the book of Judges, finding evidence of the specifics is harder. This is not surprising since Israel was basically a loose confederation at the time, with most of the actual political power being local. As a result, we should not expect the kind of archaeological evidence we would find for a kingdom. However, as usual, once the chronology is corrected, the archaeological evidence falls into place. The United Kingdom. Like other times in Israel's history, evidence for the United Kingdom, while present, is shifted in time according to the standard Egyptian chronology. When the chronology is corrected, the evidence for the prosperity of this period, particularly under Solomon, is present. The big problem is that much of what might be found like major structures were deliberately destroyed by later conquerors. This piece of pottery called the Kiyafa Ostrakon supports the start of Saul's reign by parallels to the biblical text. The need for rulers who will not oppress the poor and the stranger. The need for structures to be put into place to protect the lives of the poor and the stranger. The need for a king. The need for administrators and servants for the king. The commandment not to oppress, but to serve God. The designation of a new leader, a king. The fragmentary Tel Dan stela contains what is called the House of David inscription. This is the first historical evidence of King David from outside the Bible. The stela was erected in the mid-8th century BC. The Aramean king who did so claims to have defeated the king of Israel and the king of the House of David. Radiocarbon dating of this site at Tel Eaton date of the site's establishment to between the 11th and 10th century BC, putting it at the time of David. The evidence suggests Israel was being ruled from Judea during this period. This fits perfectly with King David. Ruins of King David's palace, found in the city of David, south of the Temple Mount. Critics naturally claim the dating of the ruins is uncertain. Here is a stone-stepped structure in the city of David, Jerusalem, at the top of which King David is thought to have built his palace. The divided kingdom. This chart shows the kings and prophets of Israel and Judah. It includes the United Kingdom as well as the divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah. The division occurred when Rehoboam stupidly refused to reduce the burden of the people and instead decided to increase it over that of his father, Solomon. The northern kingdom of Israel. The inscription on this seal reads, Shema, servant of Jeroboam. This seal was that of a servant of Jeroboam the first or Jeroboam the second. 1 Kings 16 verses 23 to 25. In the 31st year of Asa king of Judah began Omri to reign over Israel, 12 years. 6 years reigned he in Tirzah. And he bought the hill Samaria of Shemer for 2 talents of silver, and built on the hill, and called the name of the city which he built, after the name of Shemer, owner of the hill, Samaria. But Omri wrought evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did worse than all that were before him. 1 Kings 16 verses 26 to 28. For he walked in all the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and in his sin wherewith he made Israel to sin, to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger with their vanities. Now the rest of the acts of Omri which he did, and his might that he shewed, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Omri slept with his fathers, and was buried in Samaria. And Ahab his son reigned in his stead. The Mesha stone was written by Mesha, king of Moab. It speaks of Omri conquering Moab during the reign of his father. The following is a translation of several lines from this stone. Line 5. As for Omri king of Israel, he oppressed Moab for many years, for Chemosh was furious with his. Line 6. Country. And his son followed in his footsteps. And he also said, I will cast down Moab. In my days he spoke. Line 8. And he lived in it during his time and in the days of his sons, 40 years, yet Chemosh. Omri and his sons ruled for 40 years. 1 Kings 16 verse 23 says Omri ruled for 12 years, 6 of which he co-reigned with Tibni, and for 6 years he ruled as king of Israel. 1 Kings 16 verse 29 says Ahab reigned 22 years. 1 Kings 22 verse 51 says Ahab's son Ahaziah ruled 2 years. 2 Kings 9 verses 14 to 29 says Ahab's son Joram ruled 10 years, being killed by Jehu in his 11th year. 6 years plus 22 years plus 2 years plus 10 years equals 40 years. Line 18 hearths of YHWH, dragging them before Chemosh. And Israel's king built. Line 31 sheep of the land, while the house of David inhabited Horonaim. These are extra-biblical references to God and King David. Here are the ruins of Ahab's palace in Samaria and the ruins of Ahab's court building. This is significant archaeological evidence. Here is the Stela Shalmaneser, which refers to the battle at Karkar on the Orontes River. In 853 BC, Ahab and Ben-Hadad II, Aramean, joined together to stop attacks by Shalmaneser's Assyria army. It mentions 2,000 chariots and 10,000 men of Ahab king of Israel. This seal is inscribed with the letters JZBL. This seal once belonged to Ahab's wicked queen, Jezebel. This provides further support for the biblical account. 2 Kings 15 verses 29 to 30. In the days of Pekah king of Israel came Tiglath-Pileser king of Assyria, and took Ijon, and Abel-Bethmaachah, and Genoa, and Kadesh, and Hazor, and Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. And Hosea the son of Elah made a conspiracy against Pekah the son of Remaliah, and smote him, and slew him, and reigned in his stead, in the 20th year of Jotham the son of Uzziah. A confirmation of this is found in the annals of the king of Assyria himself, Tiglath-Pileser III. 2 Kings 17 verses 1 to 2. In the 12th year of Ahaz king of Judah began Hosea the son of Elah to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. The inscription on this seal is Abdi, servant of Hosea, southern kingdom of Judah. 1 Kings 14 verses 25 to 26. And it came to pass in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak king of Egypt came up against Jerusalem. And he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house. He even took away all, and he took away all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. Jean Champollion, decipherer of the Rosetta Stone, erroneously identified Pharaoh Shoshank as the Shishak of the Bible. Champollion found an inscription about Shoshank, first pharaoh of the 22nd dynasty, at the Temple of Karnak. Shoshank sounds similar to Shishak, so Champollion concluded that Shoshank was Shishak. With the biblical date for Rehoboam as a starting point, chronologists used Manetho's list to outline the following 3 centuries of Egyptian history. However, there is evidence that this assumption was wrong, because Judah could not have been the location mentioned in the inscription. This is how the chronological confusion comes about. This mistake by itself throws the dating of the standard Egyptian chronology off by 4 dynasties and hundreds of years. Based on the revised chronology, the most likely candidate for Shishak is Ramses the Great. The name Shishak closely resembles Ramses' personal name. This is supported by the fact that Ramses is known to have invaded Israel during his reign. In this context, the looting of Jerusalem makes sense and fits into the time period. 2 Chronicles 26, verse 23. So Uzziah slept with his fathers, and they buried him with his fathers in the field of the burial which belonged to the kings. For they said, "He's a leper," and Jotham his son reigned in his stead. A 1st century A.D. inscription reading, "Here were brought the bones of Uzziah, king of Judah, do not open." Here is part of Hezekiah's tunnel. It is over 18,000 feet long, and in Hezekiah's day, it was used to bring water into the city. It was a factor in Jerusalem not falling to Assyria. Hezekiah's sign of bringing back the shadow on the sundial. It suggests the sun going backwards in the sky by way of a temporary reversal of the Earth's rotation. There are legends from around the world that support it. Here is a map showing locations where there are accounts that support Hezekiah's sign. 3 are in Europe, Israel, and India, showing the sun going backwards in the sky. 1 in Asia reports the sun rising in the west. 2 in North America reported the sun setting in the east. 1 in South America reported the sun setting in the east. 1 in Central America reported the stars were going backwards in the sky. This is a 6-sided stone prism found in ancient Nineveh called Sennacherib's prism. It recounts the invasion of Judah and supports the biblical account. A collection of letters written on pottery from the biblical city of Lachish. They confirm events mentioned in the Bible that occurred during King Zedekiah's reign. They also mention the names of biblical figures. One may be the prophet Jeremiah. Gemariah, son of Hilkiah. Jeremiah 29, verse 3, by the hand of Elasah, the son of Shaphan, and Gemariah, the son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah king of Judah sent unto Babylon to Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, saying, Gemariah, son of Shaphan. Jeremiah 36, verse 10, Then read Baruch in the book the words of Jeremiah in the house of the Lord, in the chamber of Gemariah, the son of Shaphan the scribe, in the higher court, at the entry of the new gate of the Lord's house, in the ears of all the people. Jazaniah, a Judean military officer. 2 Kings 25, verse 23, And when all the captains of the armies, they and their men, heard that the king of Babylon had made Gedaliah governor, there came to Gedaliah to Mizpah, even Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and Johanan the son of Kareah, and Sariah the son of Tanimeth the Netophathite, and Jazaniah the son of a Maccathite, they and their men. Neriah, the father of Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe. Jeremiah 36, verse 4, Then Jeremiah called Baruch the son of Neriah. And Baruch wrote from the mouth of Jeremiah all the words of the Lord, which he had spoken unto him, upon a roll of a book. Mattaniah, who Nebuchadnezzar appointed king of Judea. 2 Kings 24, verse 17, And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah his father's brother king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. The name Jeremiah, and possibly refers to the prophet Jeremiah. So, despite claims that there is no evidence supporting the biblical account, the problem is not one of evidence, but of chronology. The problem comes from the fact that the standard Egyptian chronology does not fit the biblical account. Once the chronology is corrected, the evidence falls into place. The Bible is supported by abundant archaeological evidence, but it is often being misplaced in history by a faulty chronology. The key is making the Bible the standard for chronology rather than Egypt. This is a good idea since the Egyptians have a history of not being totally honest with reporting their history, while the Bible is the Word of God.